If you've always wanted to start your own business, but you don't know exactly how to get started, or you just want the exact step-by-step formula to make sure that you actually succeed, then this video is for you. Hey there, I'm John, and I spent way too long working a corporate job that I hated because I just didn't know how to get started with building a business. So today I'm going to teach you everything that I learned working at Goldman Sachs, going to Stanford Business School, and now running my own 8-figure software business that I built from scratch so that you can build your own dream business and hopefully struggle a little bit less than I did. And so in this video, I'm gonna teach you the step-by-step of how you're gonna take this startup idea that you probably have in your head right now and turn it into making your first $1 million for your own business. And specifically, there are 3 main steps that we're gonna go over today, with number 1 being ideation. AKA, I'm gonna make sure that you have an actually good startup idea, which then leads us to number 2, creation, which is how do you take an idea that's in your head and turn it into a real tangible thing that people actually want to pay you money for. And then lastly, and most importantly, is how do you actually grow that thing? AKA, how do you go from landing your first few customers to then generating $1 million plus in revenue, which if you think about is actually kind of wild. And quick preface, guys, the information we're about to go through is gonna be super dense, but I promise you, if you just stay with me here, you have the exact step-by-step of how to actually be successful. So why don't we get started? All right, step number 1, which is we're gonna make sure that you have an actually good startup idea on your hands, because the very last thing that I want you to do is to watch this entire video and then spend the next 5 years of your life working on a startup idea that is actually a flop. AKA, please do not do this. So this is what we're gonna do to either help you come up with a really good startup idea, or if you already have one, make sure you've really properly vetted it. And we're gonna do this by starting with something that's actually super counterintuitive, which is actually to start with finding a problem that you really truly care about and not the idea that you already have. But what do I mean by that? Basically, I don't want you to make the mistake of having an idea in your head that you think is the most optimal solution, when in reality, it might not actually be what people truly want. AKA, please do not be the next Google Glass, where when you think about Google Glass, it was actually a pretty cool idea. But when you start to think about like, what did it actually do for people other than make you look like this? You start to realize that they weren't really solving any clear problem for us. And in fact, when you try to think about what was the problem they were trying to solve with these glasses, it was really just us trying to get more information at our fingertips. And so when you focus on a problem instead, and you don't get so stuck on an idea of a cool thing you want to build, you actually end up being successful like Steve Jobs, who solved this problem around instant information access by building us mobile phones. And so whether or not you have a startup idea or you're still trying to find yours, I want you to run through this checklist with me, which is number 1, what problem are you solving? Basically, how are you helping them? Whether you're helping them lose weight or save time or save stress or be happier, what are you doing for people where you can ask yourself the question, how am I truly, truly helping someone? Because once you answer that then gets you to the next question, which is this problem large enough? AKA, is the market of people who cares about this problem actually enough for you to make money? Which comes in conjunction with the second question here, which is this problem actually painful enough? AKA, if you're really intellectually honest with yourself, do people actually care enough about this problem that they would pay you to solve it for them? Because if you can answer yes to this question, it leads you to the final and most important question, which is, do you truly care about this specific problem? And I know this sounds super woo-woo of like, oh, if you care more, you'll succeed more. But I want you to play this out with me, which is imagine you're working on some startup idea and you think about all the late nights required, all the rejection you're gonna face, all of the stress. Basically, if you don't care deeply about this problem or the mission you're on, you're not gonna make it through. And so it begs the question of how do you actually find a problem that you truly care about? And honestly, the best way I've found to find a problem that you truly care about is just to find a problem in your own personal life that you really, really dislike and wanna solve for yourself. And so for me, I actually attribute a ton of my success with my startup Stan to the fact that it actually just came out of my own problem as a creator myself. Where back in the day, I really loved creating content, but trying to run and manage an entire business on top of that just felt impossible. And so Stan was basically the answer to that, where I then had a one-stop shop to host and run my entire business. And I actually think the reason why we've been able to persist and actually succeed in the long term is because we just really, really, truly, deeply care about this problem, because I feel it viscerally every day as a creator myself, and we see it with all of our creator friends all the time too. And so now that we've defined a clear problem that we want to go solve, it's actually time to go land our first few customers. But you might be asking yourself, wait a minute, John. All we've done so far is just isolate a problem. Like, we don't even have a startup idea yet, let alone a product or a service. So like, how are we gonna actually get people to pay us and become our first few customers? And so what I would say to that is, I'm gonna teach you about a method that I use that I like to call the dual track method. And the reason why I love the dual track method is because I think it's one of few moments in life where you get to have your cake and eat it too. Specifically, with the dual track method, you're able to figure out what your billion-dollar idea is going to be while also landing your first few customers. And you're going to do this by first going out and finding other people who have this specific problem you're trying to solve. So for me, I basically reached out to hundreds of creators. Like I said, hundreds of cold DMs and cold emails, just asking, hey, like, I want to help solve this problem for you. Would you be open to getting on the phone with me and sharing your experience? And for the few people who did respond, I just started asking them tons of questions. Questions like, how do you currently make money? What are your top frustrations? What are your biggest pain points? Like, what tools do you currently use? What do you wish you had? And even questions like, what would you actually pay me to do for you? And it was through this questioning process that I learned that creators were spending thousands of dollars a month on like 15 different software solutions and dozens of hours of headache just to try to build an online storefront. And so I just took all of that feedback and used that to come up with my idea, which was just an all-in-one creator store builder that was actually simple and easy to use. And what was wild to me about this situation was that also led me to my first few customers. Because when you think about the dual track method, you first start by trying to figure out your actual idea, which requires you to talk to potential customers in your industry. And these were some of the first creators I spoke to. They were so kind and so helpful. They gave me so much feedback, where when I actually had my idea, I just went in there and was like, hey, this is basically your regurgitated feedback synthesized together. Would you actually be interested in using this? And all of these people that I had worked with and interviewed for tons of time, just iterated with them on ideas, they were like, of course. I mean, this is exactly what I told you that I want. Let me be your first few customers. AKA, the people that you speak to that you're trying to solve this problem for can become not only your first few customers, but true partners in your business and help you achieve success. And so now that we have our killer startup idea, it's time for step number 2. Woo! Which is getting your business off the ground. Now, the problem with this step, though, is that this is where most people drop off, because we're all really good at coming up with ideas in our heads and not so much as good at following through. Especially because you're going to tell me, oh, John, I don't have the time or I don't have the money. And so to address that, I'm going to teach you 3 different ways that you can start your business even if you don't have any money. So step number 1 is to serviceify your idea. So what do I mean by that? Let's say, for example, you have an app idea where you want to build some sort of solution that allows anyone out there to build their own website. But you don't have the coding chops to do it yourself, so you're going to need to pay an engineer in order to actually code this app for you. But you don't have the money, right? And so this is where serviceifying your offering comes in. What I mean by that is you can go out there and manually offer to build websites for different small business owners to build them, let's say, a mobile website. And through that process, not only are you going to start making money to actually hire an engineering team to build your app idea, but actually more importantly, because you're going to be working with all these small business owners and learning what they want in their product and their website, you're going to learn about all the nitty-gritty customizations or features or workflows that you need to build into your actual app idea that will actually allow you to be more successful later on. Basically, whatever idea you have, start first by trying to think about how can I offer this as a one-off manual service in order to validate your idea before you try to blow it out. And this is actually how the founders of DoorDash started DoorDash, where they didn't even have a mobile app. They just threw up a static HTML website to deliver food only specifically for the Palo Alto area, and they themselves were the one delivering everything. Now, the next idea, Kobe, is to prototype it. Basically, let's say that you want to start your own clothing brand, but you don't have the thousands of dollars on hand to put in a huge batch order of your first order of clothing. Well, here's the thing about coming up with an actually good idea, because if the thing you're doing is actually good enough, let's say you've designed a really cool looking shirt that looks way better than this. If it's actually a really cool design or whatever you're working on is actually solving someone's problem, they will actually chomp at the bit and even offer to pre-fund that idea for you. AKA the entire premise of websites like Kickstarter, where people have raised millions of dollars before ever shipping their first product. And beyond that, you can actually do what Sarah Blakely did when she first started Spanx, which she started in her own closet and has now built a multi-billion-dollar company around. Where when she first started Spanx and she had the idea for it, she had solely a couple small prototypes. And what she did is she went door to door and sold those and used that tiny amount of cash to reinvest in buying a bigger batch and then using those funds to keep reinvesting in the business until she built it to the size that it is today. And that all brings us to the last, and I would argue the most effective way to start your business off of the ground, which is to just build it. As simple as that is, this is what's getting in your head and preventing you from actually going and doing. Where so many folks will tell me, hey John, I have this app idea or this software idea, but I don't know how to code myself, so how can I get this off the ground? And my answer to you is to do what the Airbnb founders did, which is that neither of them knew how to code whatsoever, but instead were super scrappy and super hungry. Basically, they just used Craigslist as their initial distribution model to just post listings of their bedroom, and then they stood up a really scrappy website with a random website hoster and used that initially to get their first few listings and get their business off the ground. Point being is that if you don't know how to code or you feel like you don't know how to do some certain part that's required for succeeding in your business, I'm here to tell you that everything that you need is online for free at this point. Like, you can literally learn how to code. Like, I'll put all of my favorite resources right here. But beyond that now, AI nowadays will just generate code for you, and you can even use GPT assistants to actually build a service for you without any code. And then lastly, if you truly feel like you need, let's say, a technical co-founder in this case, this is just your first true test of whether or not you're gonna be successful in building your own business, which is if you can't hustle to build your network and meet other really smart people and then convince them to join your cause or your mission, how are you possibly going to get this business off the ground and convince thousands of customers to use your product? But bottom line to all of this is I know how hard and scary all of this is, but I promise you, if you just commit 30 minutes a day to having this be your side hustle for now, over an entire year of consistent effort and commitment, you will start to see progress, especially if you follow this next concept, which is an MVP, otherwise known as a minimum viable product, where basically this whole concept of an MVP is going to save you a ton of time and money, because I guarantee you, whatever your first version of whatever you want to start is going to be, it's just not gonna be very good. Like, before I started Stan, I used to think, oh yeah, I could start a business or build a product and crush it really fast. But the cold hard reality of that is that was very much so not the case. And in fact, in order to succeed in business, you essentially have to fail forward a bunch of times and learn over time. And so as you go about building your business off of the ground, I want you to keep this concept of minimum viable product in mind, because the number one mistake a lot of entrepreneurs make, including myself, is when you first start your business idea, you're like, oh, I have this great idea, but I need this feature and this feature and this feature and that feature and 17 other features to perfect your grand vision. Instead of following this more counterintuitive but much more logical methodology of the MVP, where you should actually just ship only that first core value prop differentiator you have and ignore everything else. So as concrete examples, I mentioned before that both Airbnb and DoorDash, which are multi-billion-dollar companies, started out without any sort of application or any sort of frills in their offering, because these entrepreneurs knew they had to do one thing really, really well instead, which was to iterate. Because what's gonna happen when you first launch your product or your idea or your business is that of all the people you try to launch that to, there will only be a small subset of people who are actually like, you know, honestly, this is pretty cool. I actually really like it. And these are the people that you should iterate with and double down on. Where for me, when I first started Stan, the first version of Stan was so ugly, but I shipped it and there were actually a couple people who were like, hey John, this is awesome. I really love it and it's really helping me. And at first my reaction was like, are you sure? Like it's really clunky and really bad. But they said, yeah, I mean, it is pretty ugly, but it helps me make money really easily. And when they said the term easily, that was my realization that there was something there, specifically because I then did another method, which I like to call the 5 whys, which basically means when you start to figure out how to solve a problem, you should ask your customer or your interviewee 5 sets of whys. What do I mean by that? Basically, whenever I asked those first few customers who actually did like Stan, why they like Stan, they said, hey John, I like it because it helps me make money easily. But that information isn't enough for you to build a great business off of, because you have to keep asking sub-layers of why. So I asked them again, why did Stan make it easy for you to do that? And they said, well, it takes me just a couple seconds to set up an entire storefront and start offering products. Which then led me to another round of asking why that was so helpful to them or so interesting to them, which then led my customers to divulge, well, it's because John, right now the problem in the market is I otherwise have to spend hundreds of hours doing this and my time is the most valuable thing possible, which then once again leads to another round of why does that actually matter? Well, why is your time so valuable in this case? It's because, well, John, I want to spend all my time creating content, not managing a storefront or building a business. And so what you see here now is you get a ton of clarity, where for me, I had distilled that there were 2 clear variables that my customers really cared about, which was making more money with even less time. And so what I did to iterate was I kept building more features like a faster checkout or more products they could offer, like let's say a video course or physical products, to allow them to make even more money, and at the same time, started offering more features that made this even simpler and even easier to set up. And what you're gonna find is as you do that, you're gonna get more feedback, which is gonna lead you to more features, and your product is gonna keep improving in this flywheel, which ultimately is gonna allow you to build a really fantastic business. I'm tired, guys. But only if you do one last step to actually go from having a good product to actually getting a ton of customers and making your first $1 million, which is scaling. Specifically, how are you gonna go from just a couple people kind of interested in your product to thousands of people trying to fight each other to rip your product off the shelves? AKA, I'm gonna teach you guys how to go big. So there's actually just one thing that you need in order to go big, and that is specifically to find your distribution channel. But what actually is a distribution channel? Basically, it's your growth avenue or the one repeatable thing that you're gonna keep doing that will consistently grow your business for you. Where when you think about all of these successful companies out there, they all had some sort of distribution channel. So a good example is Uber. Think about the early days of Uber. In order to grow Uber, they actually use a user referral network. Like you could always give $5 to a friend who didn't have Uber and you got $5. It was this really clever hack to grow their network. In the same way, Gymshark used a completely different distribution channel, which is as a fitness brand, they actually just leveraged all of these fitness influencers to talk about Gymshark and wear their clothing. Now, that's also really different from another distribution channel that HubSpot pioneered. It's a really famous small business software solution where they dominated SEO, where you'll actually notice that whenever you search a question related to running a small business, so whether that's like, how do you start a business or how do you actually file your taxes, HubSpot actually dominates all of the top search results. Now, that's very different from an app like Tinder that used an entirely different distribution channel where when they first started here, they actually started at colleges and through these offline parties, basically in-person events with a bunch of fraternities and a bunch of sororities and had them mixed together in order to bootstrap that initial dating app network. So what you'll see here is that there's tons of other successful companies out there who had extremely different ways to grow or to build a distribution channel. So some highlights that I have here too is like Red Bull, incredible at event marketing, building a brand around a lifestyle, which is super different from Amazon, which bootstrapped itself off of an affiliate network where people could link to different Amazon books and make money, and still really different from BetterHelp, which you've seen as ads on YouTube and podcasts all the time, and even more different from Salesforce, which is one of the most successful software companies of all time, where they had such a high ticket price, they could justify hiring actual salespeople to go in and try to sell their product for them. Point being to all of these cool examples is that you need to find your distribution channel for your business, which is actually as simple as just answering this one question here, which is, where are my customers disproportionately hanging out? Now, for me, kneeling takes a lot of effort, but for me, when I first started Stan, and you think about my customer set, which is social media creators and online entrepreneurs, well, you ask yourself, where do they hang out? And that for me is on social media. And so all I did in the early days was just make a lot of content on social media that taught creators how to actually make money, which I used as a demand generation funnel for our business. So the lesson for you to take away here is when you first start building your business and trying to get distribution, find that one channel where your customers are disproportionately hanging out at, and then once you start to see traction, blow that out. Because if you end up being successful at this, that ends up placing you into the big leagues, where your reward for solving all of these hard problems are actually even harder problems. So things like, how do you keep growing your company into the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, on top of how do you start fending off the competition and start beating them? And then on top of all of that, trying to figure out your people problems of like, how do you hire in more people who are awesome? How do you manage them, retain them, and build an incredible culture to take care of them? All of that to be said, these are all challenges that I'm currently exploring myself in my journey of trying to build a billion-dollar company, which I do document in the vlog here. So make sure to subscribe because I would absolutely love to give you the inside look into that process and for you to be along the journey with me. And with that being said, I have one last thing to leave you with, which is that you've got this.